Fan Chapter 892. 3 episodes are dropping today. Witnessing that, the two Bifan men felt a wave of relief as the pressure in their hearts finally lifted. The head of the house had finally called the eldest miss away, putting an end to the tense atmosphere that had left them in such an awkward spot. I am going to go see my father for a bit. Then I'll come back and deal with you two stiff-necked guys. Let's go. Shanguan Kanjian picked up Gusantum and then turned to tell Zhuo Fan to come along to see her father and clear everything up. Zhuo Fan gave a slight smile, nodded in agreement, and casually followed her. However, a figure suddenly appeared and blocked his path. Zhuo Fan couldn't stop in time and collided hard with the guy, forcing him back 5 steps before he could regain his balance. Looking closely, he realized it was Shanguan Yulin, the same man who had just delivered the message earlier. Zhuo Fan figured the guy was intentionally looking for an excuse to mess with him after their run-in yesterday. Shanguan Kanjian was busy carrying Gusantum away at the time, so she didn't notice that Zhuo Fan had been stopped. Once she was out of sight, Shanguan Yulin looked at Zhuo Fan with total contempt and warned him to stay away from the young lady because of his low status. After dropping some sarcastic remarks, Shanguan Yulin sneered and walked off. Zhuo Fan frowned as he watched him go, feeling disappointed by the narrow-mindedness of someone from such a prominent clan. In reality, Zhuo Fan didn't want to scrap with a guy like that, so he kept his cool and continued walking. Before long, everyone had fully gathered in the main hall. The head of the house, Shanguan Fixum, was already there waiting. As soon as she saw her father, Shanguan Kanjian immediately started venting about all her grievances. Shanguan Fixum calmly waved her off, suggesting that these minor issues should be handled by the subordinates. I just wanted them to protect the father and son. Well, I didn't expect my men to be so rigid, so I'll straighten them out later. Then, he seriously assigned the mission of scouting the city to Zhuo Fan, with the support of Kindian and Yulin. Shanguan Kinjian excitedly asked if Gusantum could come along as well. Of course he can. Shanguan Fixum confirmed that he wasn't restricting their freedom at all. That's awesome. Shanguan Kinjian hugged Gusantum in excitement. Gusantum gave an innocent smile, while Zhuo Fan quietly calculated some deeper plans. On the crowded streets, the 3 of them walking together looked just like a happy family. Zhuo Fan and Shanguan Kinjian walked on either side, holding Gusantum's hands in the middle. This heartwarming scene made many people nearby feel both admiration and envy. However, from the shadows, Shanguan Yulin was watching with absolute rage. Shanguan Fixum had calculated everything carefully when he sent the young people out on the mission. Those with high cultivation levels were easily spotted by the city patrols. On the flip side, the cultivation levels of Zhuo Fan's group were very common, so they wouldn't draw any attention. Even Shanguan Yulin's level was considered average, making intelligence gathering a lot safer. Shanguan Yulin had to stay hidden in the shadows, while the other 3 could walk around in the open. This was because Zhuo Fan had a legal identity in the city, while Shanguan Yulin didn't. If his ID was checked, Shanguan Yulin's cover would be blown instantly. So, he could only follow them secretly, feeling incredibly pissed off seeing the 3 of them having a good time together. Dad, I want to buy this toy. Auntie, I'd like that one over there. Alright, we'll buy them all. Dad, Auntie, how about we just buy this whole stall? Zhuo Fan and Shanguan Kinjian spoiled Gusantum together and chatted very intimately. Shanguan Yulin had to lurk behind them, feeling miserable as he witnessed the scene. The worst feeling was having to watch the person you love with someone else while being completely helpless. This helplessness made Shanguan Yulin extremely resentful. However, since he didn't have a legal identity, he just had to suck it up. Playing. 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 Suddenly, the rapid sound of a gong rang out from the market, catching everyone's attention. Zhuo Fan's group also headed that way out of curiosity to see what was going on. At the bulletin board, a guard from the prince's mansion was banging a gong, and he had a fairly high cultivation level. The guard announced that the empire's crown prince was seriously injured and the mansion was looking for master alchemists to treat him. After that announcement, the crowd around them got really hyped up. In Central State, the Swordstar Empire was the sole dominant power. Scoring a position in the imperial court would be a massive honor for the whole clan. People started buzzing with excitement, hoping for a shot at this opportunity. Zhuo Fan stood there watching and started mulling over the situation. Whether the news about the crown prince was real or fake, it was still a great chance for him to infiltrate the mansion and scout the layout. I mean, thousand. Shanguan Kinjian almost used Zhuo Fan's real name, but caught herself and changed how she addressed him. She whispered that they should head back, because Gusantum was probably tired after being out for so long. Zhuo Fan knew she wanted to report this news, so he agreed right away. However, just as they had walked a bit, Shanguan Yulin suddenly appeared and pulled them into a secluded corner. Shanguan Kinjian was surprised, and asked why he was acting so secretive. Shanguan Yulin told her to take the kid back first, saying he needed Zhuo Fan to come with him to help investigate some suspicious activities by the people from the mansion. Shanguan Qingjian didn't suspect a thing and told her cousin to protect Zhuo Fan well since his cultivation wasn't that high. A nasty thought crossed Shanguan Yulin's mind, but he quickly hid it. He smiled and promised to bring Zhuo Fan back safely. Seeing that, Shanguan Qingjian left with peace of mind. Zhuo Fan realized something was off, but he didn't sweat it too much. He wanted to see what the guy was planning to do to him. Shanguan Qingjian carried Du Santum back to the manor. Meanwhile, Shanguan Yulin dragged Zhuo Fan toward the woods with a murderous look in his eyes. What? The prince's mansion is recruiting alchemists. In the main hall, Shanguan Fiction was surprised to hear the news and asked his daughter how accurate the info was. Shanguan Qingjian confirmed that the news was being talked about everywhere. Shanguan Fiction figured this was a good opportunity but also suspected it might be a trap. He asked about Yulin and Yifan's whereabouts since they weren't with her. She explained that Yulin had taken Yifan to help investigate leads on the mansion. He believed that with Yulin being so careful, Yifan would be safe. Shanguan Fiction sighed and kept thinking about the recruitment as he headed toward the backyard. He walked into the room and saw the three elders meditating. He reported the situation and voiced his concerns about whether this was a chance or a trap. If you want to reach your goal, you've got to take risks. One elder reckoned this was a more logical way to infiltrate the mansion compared to the head-on attack they tried last time. I really don't want to put these young people in danger. Shanguan Fiction shook his head sadly. Another elder insisted that sending the young ones was necessary because they could hide their identities more easily. I hope everything turns out okay too. He expressed his willingness to make sacrifices but was still worried about the future of the youth. Shanguan Fiction nodded and sighed. Another elder emphasized the goal of finding the divine weapon and wondered who would take on the role of the alchemist to infiltrate. Shanguan Fiction agreed the mission had to go to the younger generation, but he was worried because no one had good alchemy skills. Everyone looked at each other and shook their heads in disappointment. The Shanguan clan had plenty of martial arts geniuses but lacked anyone with a talent for alchemy. Shanguan Fiction thought only Yulin had a shot at applying since the requirements for cultivation and technique were so high. The three elders finally agreed to this plan. Even though he wasn't a pro, Yulin was the best fit among the young ones to pull off the mission. So the news about the crown prince being injured is fake. In a magnificent hall, a middle-aged man with a commanding presence sat in the highest seat. His sharp gaze was fixed on the person sitting to his left. The young man who looked like a scholar was smiling gently. However, his deep eyes made the older man feel cautious. "Prime Minister, are you putting on a show for me?" The young man spoke up and then suddenly burst out laughing. "I want to ask the Flying Cloud Sword King why you didn't report the attack on the mansion 2 months ago to the imperial capital." That man was Shanguan Fian, one of the 9 Sword Kings of Central State. The young man was Bailey Jingwei, the Prime Minister of the Empire. Bailey Jingwei had come to the mansion and taken it upon himself to spread fake news about the crown prince to recruit alchemists. The fact that he admitted the news was fake made Shanguan Fian feel insulted and angry. Even if you're the Prime Minister, taking it upon yourself to order my men around without asking is just too arrogant, Shanguan Fian snapped, adding that he could deal with the attackers on his own without reporting to the capital. After he finished speaking, he glanced to the right and asked in a casual, but sarcastic tone whether having to clear everything with the imperial capital turned the 9 Sword Kings into nothing more than useless puppets. The only response he got was the sound of someone chugging wine. A man was clutching a golden wine guard and drinking his fill, acting like he couldn't care less about world affairs with this tense conversation. It wasn't until Shanguan Fian asked him directly that the guy slowly set down his guard and looked up. It was the face of a very familiar-looking old drunk. If Zhuo Fan were here, he'd definitely be floored to see Dan Qingsheng, the top expert of the Western lands, showing up in a place like this. Dan Qingsheng let out a few hiccups, rubbed his booze-reddened nose, and laughed, saying this was a private matter between Fian and Prime Minister Bailey that he didn't want any part of. He told them to go ahead and talk it out, but to please leave him out of the argument. He was only there on escort duty, and would head back to the capital with the Prime Minister as soon as they were done, without worrying about anything else. Bailey Jingwei laughed out loud and said he really had to trouble the dragon-slaying Sword King this time. He reassured him that the trip back would be smooth sailing, and that no one would dare cause enough trouble to make the Sword King lift a finger. Bailey Jingwei gave a polite bow, then turned to Shanguan Fian with a sharp gaze and suggested getting straight to the point. He wondered why the manor was trashed and the whole city was terrified if the troublemakers from 2 months ago were just some low-level nobodies. If it really were a small matter, the Prime Minister wouldn't have needed to complicate things by personally asking the dragon-slaying Sword King to escort him. Shanguan Fian stayed quiet, but his face clearly showed how annoyed and pissed off he was. Bailey Jingwei gave a knowing smile, stood up, and asserted that they both knew full well the ones causing chaos were from the Shunguan clan. Their target was definitely the Sky God sword, that Eastern Lands treasure the Sword King had just brought to the central area. His old ancestor had wanted to see those four divine swords that guarded the four corners of the world for a long time. Bringing that divine sword back was a massive achievement for the Sword King. The old ancestor is definitely going to be thrilled when he hears the news. The Prime Minister then offered his sincerest thanks to the Sword King on behalf of the old ancestor. After he finished speaking, Bailey Jingwei gave Shan Wanfeiyan a respectful bow. Shan Wanfeiyan stared at the young Prime Minister with wavering eyes, his expression shifting constantly, yet he still didn't say a word. Bailey Jingwei casually stood up straight and explained that the old ancestor was currently in seclusion, so he couldn't come to see the sword right away. However, he reminded him that if the sword were to go missing during such a sensitive time, the old ancestor definitely wouldn't let it slide once he found out. The Sword King could probably imagine just how terrifying the old ancestor's wrath would be. Shan Wanfeiyan slammed his hand on the table and stood up, shouting with fury in his eyes, asking if Bailey Jingwei was using the invincible sword patriarch's name to threaten him. Bailey Jingwei calmly shook his head and explained that he wouldn't dare threaten someone with such a high status, especially one appointed by the old ancestor himself like the Sword King. He insisted he was just stating the obvious. If the old ancestor got angry, it wouldn't just be the Sword King, everyone involved in the empire would have their lives on the line. That's why, as soon as he got the news, he rushed over here and asked the Crown Prince and the royal family to help pull off a plan. The rumor about the Crown Prince being seriously injured and going into hiding was actually just a trap to help the Sword King catch the sword thieves. Since protecting the divine sword was a matter of life and death for everyone, both sides needed to work closely together. Shan Wanfeiyan thought it over for a moment, cooled off a bit, and asked if spreading this rumor would actually work. He wondered if their enemies were really naive enough to walk right into such an obvious trap at the manor. Bailey Jingwei laughed and told the Sword King he was worrying too much. According to his plan, the alchemist selection competition would be the moment the Shanwan clan members came looking for them. He gave a calculating smile and remarked that people usually fail because of greed, not because they're stupid. Greed is a weakness that nobody can resist when they're staring at a juicy piece of bait. He knew they'd failed miserably the last time they tried a direct attack on the manor. Since the chances of winning with the same old method were slim to none, they definitely wouldn't make that mistake again. Therefore, he proposed creating an opening by using the sword as bait and the alchemy competition as the excuse to lure them in. Once they fell for the trap, the army would surround them and wipe them all out without leaving a single soul alive. Wiping out the Shangguan clan would seriously weaken the eastern lands and pave the way for a future invasion. This was the way to completely eliminate the threat and shut down any future headaches. Shan Wanfeiyan nodded, admitting that the Prime Minister's calculations were incredibly deep. He realized the Prime Minister didn't just want to protect the sword, but also wanted to use this chance to prep for the occupation of the eastern lands. Bailey Jingwei laughed loudly and repeated his earlier point. He admitted that greed is a fatal weakness, and even he himself was caught up in it. With a scheming look on his face, he insisted that they shouldn't pass up such a perfect chance to hit two birds with one stone. Shan Wanfeiyan thought for a moment, then agreed and expressed his admiration for the Prime Minister's strategic brilliance. Still, he wondered if the Shangguan clan would really take the bait, considering alchemy wasn't exactly their strong suit. Bailey Jingwei explained that the very fact that the plan seemed difficult made it feel more authentic and enticing. He figured that people who are backed into a corner get suspicious if they see a path that's too easy. On the flip side, a tough challenge would make them trust it more and be more willing to take the risk. He suggested the Sword King temporarily hand over command of the manor guards to him and loosen up the security at the city gates. The Prime Minister promised to round up every last enemy within 2 weeks so the Sword King could stop worrying. Shan Wanfeiyan watched him for a long time before finally giving a slight nod of approval. Bailey Jingwei smiled with satisfaction, and then changed the subject by asking for permission to check out a famous scenic spot in the manor. Shan Wanfeiyan nodded, and promised to send a guard to show the Prime Minister around. Bailey Jingwei smiled and thanked the Sword King. Before heading out, he asked Dan Qingshan if he wanted to tag along for the tour. Dan and Qingshan waved him off and said he only cared about good booze and art, not pretty views. After that, he went right back to drinking from his flask. Bailey Jingwei shook his head in disappointment and muttered about how art and scenery always go hand in hand as he walked away. Once the Prime Minister was long gone, Shan Wanfeiyan let out a sigh and asked Dan Qingshan if he'd noticed anything. He remarked that while Bailey Jingwei acted polite, he actually had everything under control and had plant eyes and ears everywhere. Everything that happened here was being reported back to the imperial capital immediately. He felt like his title as one of the 9 Sword Kings didn't actually carry any real power anymore. Dan Qingshan suggested that the title of Sword King was really just for people who had lost to someone else before. He gave a sad smile, and said he just wanted long-term peace and didn't care about a few spies hanging around. Shan Guanfeiyan told Dan Qingshan he was being way too idealistic, just wanting a quiet lie. He explained that he followed the invincible sword patriarch, because he wanted to conquer the world alongside someone powerful and build his own legacy. He believed that one day he'd get his hands on the soaring sky sword, and become the true master of the eastern land. Dan Qingshan set down his wine guard and laughed sarcastically at Feiyun's ambition to rule the East. He pointed out that the entire continent would eventually belong to the Empire, and they were just acting as managers rather than actual owners. He insisted those were just Feiyun's own unrealistic delusions. Shan Guanfeiyan shot him a furious look and declared that he would never accept a fate like that. At that same moment, in the dark and quiet forest, two loud sounds ripped through the silence. Right after that, two dark figures moved at lightning speed, and then came to a halt, revealing two familiar faces. One was Shangguan Yulin, who looked handsome, and possessed the overwhelming power of a soul-merging stage expert. The other was Zhuo Fan, a guy who looked pretty average but had deep eyes and an incredibly mysterious vibe. Zhuo Fan looked at the vast bamboo forest ahead, faking a confused look, and asked Shangguan Yulin in a phony voice, "Big Kaosun, is there something weird up ahead? Because I've been looking and I still don't see a thing." "Damn it, who the hell is your Kaosun?" Shangguan Yulin thought to himself, fuming with rage, but he managed to force a cold, fake smile on the outside. He pointed toward a dark area ahead with a strange expression and claimed he'd just seen a guard from the Feiyun mansion sneak in there but couldn't show himself, so he wanted Zhuo Fan to go check it out, while also warning him to just say he was sightseeing if he got caught to avoid trouble. Zhuo Fan frowned slightly, pretending to squint for a better look before shaking his head in confusion. "Are you sure? Because I don't see any signs of anyone passing through here at all." Seeing him hesitate, Shangguan Yulin gave him a gentle nudge forward with a slight grin and convinced him that a guard definitely went this way for some shady business and that uncovering it would earn him major points with his uncle. "Really? I'm about to hit the jackpot." Zhuo Fan nodded repeatedly, as if he finally got the hint, and then started slowly walking forward. However, the second Zhuo Fan turned his back, Shangguan Yulin intentionally lagged behind. Once Zhuo Fan's figure completely vanished, his eyes suddenly turned cold, radiating pure killing intent. Whoosh! Lightning fast, Shangguan Yulin launched a massive strike aimed right at Zhuo Fan's back. Zhuo Fan shuddered slightly and felt genuinely surprised deep down, because even though he knew Shangguan Yulin was a piece of work, he didn't expect the guy to be bold enough to actually make a move, since this was a big deal, him being the head of the Go family in Feiyun City, and if something happened and the mansion investigated, the Shangguan clan would definitely be in hot water, a consequence so heavy that this guy, who didn't seem like a total idiot, shouldn't have dared to risk attacking him like this. Zhuo Fan hesitated for a split second, unsure whether to dodge or just take the hit. If he dodged, his true strength would be exposed, and he might have to kill the guy to keep things quiet, which would be even harder to explain to the outside world. But if he didn't, how should he react to match the cultivation level he was faking? His body was already incredibly tough, so taking one hit wouldn't really be a problem. Honestly, he wasn't worried about himself, he just felt bad for the guy attacking him. If Shangguan Yulin ever found out the truth, he'd probably lose his mind from pure rage. As the force drew near, Zhuo Fan realized the guy's true intent wasn't to kill him, but just to mess him up badly so he'd be easier to control. Since he wants to play games, I'll play along for a bit, Zhuo Fan thought, secretly circulating his energy to mess with his blood flow and cause a self-inflicted injury, letting a trickle of blood tongue from the corner of his mouth. Just then, the powerful blow slammed directly into his back. Boom. After that heavy hit, Zhuo Fan coughed up a mouthful of blood, collapsed to the ground, and pretended to pass out cold. Shangguan Yulin stood there with a cold sneer, mocking him by saying a low-life like him shouldn't dream of his cousin, and claiming this was exactly what he deserved, before casually walking over to Zhuo Fan with his right hand starting to glow with a chilling aura, while Zhuo Fan, even while lying still, could clearly feel the freezing air behind him and wondered what the guy was planning next, while silently warning himself that he wasn't afraid of the Shangguan clan at all. Shangguan Yulin said in a cold voice that since he needed Zhuo Fan's identity as a cover, he wouldn't kill him yet, but he would ruin his body with the severing pulse hand technique that would make his meridians rot away until he became a useless cripple in a month, and no longer worthy of his cousin. But just as he was about to strike, a deep, raspy voice rang out, asking if he was afraid Shangguan Fiction would find out the truth and refuse to marry his daughter to such a ruthless person, causing Shangguan Yulin to be startled yet still confidently claim he had a plan to frame the mansion guard so his uncle would only think Zhuo Fan was badly injured without suspecting him, until he suddenly realized what was happening, and asked who had just spoken with a dazed, blank look, wondering who on earth had just questioned him. "The kid, your crooked mindset and ruthless moves are perfect for the demonic path, so you're coming with me." Suddenly, the surroundings went pitch black as a curtain of night swallowed everything, leaving Shangguan Yulin completely isolated. He panicked and asked if it was a soul domain, but then immediately scoffed, thinking someone at a lower level couldn't possibly trap him and threatening to tear it apart as he aggressively threw a massive punch, only for a roar to echo at that exact moment as an invisible force tightly bound his body and invaded his meridians until his power stalled and his whole body went stiff, leaving an expert of his caliber unable to move so much as a finger, while a mocking laugh rang out, reminding him that the world is vast and being at a higher level doesn't guarantee a win, while calling him out on his arrogance. Seeing Shangguan Yulin pinned down, Chuo Fan gave a cold laugh and said his shameless personality was right up his alley, so he decided to take him on as a disciple and demanded he capto 100 times to show respect.